Sometimes a performance can make your stomach turn. It can uncover a harrowing aspect of human nature that we'd almost rather not know about, but due to our fascination with evil, we find ourselves unable to look away. But these performances are challenging enough to witness when they're pure fiction. They fall into another category entirely when they're based on real events. And that's why I view Ralph Fiennes' portrayal of Amon Goeth as one of the most haunting screen performances of all time. Fiennes would go on to play other famous villains, such as Voldemort in the Harry Potter series, alongside strong turns in Bruges, Red Dragon, and The Menu. But in 1993, with a background mostly in theatre, Schindler's List was only his third feature film. No one had any reason to expect anything from him. But it was now, at the age of 31, that he would take on a role that would skyrocket him towards international recognition, earning him his first ever Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and only narrowly somehow losing to Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive. But what is it about this performance that makes it so haunting? Let's examine the finer details of Ralph Fiennes' depiction of Amon Goeth. The first key is preparation and research. Ralph steeped himself in Nazi propaganda. He read their literature, their history, and watched their recruitment and combat videos to genuinely understand their appeal. How comforting it must have felt to belong to a clan with a purpose and an enemy. So rather than resisting it or critiquing its faults, he brainwashed himself with his character's perspective. He would read Mein Kampf and make himself agree, yes, he's right, of course, here, yes. As unless he ideologically believed what his character believed, he couldn't properly embody his values, and therefore the performance would feel too shallow. He stated, "It's not a rational thing, but an instinctive thing. If you're playing a role, you're immersing yourself in thinking about that character, how he moves, how he thinks. In the end, he becomes an extension of your own self. You like him." And this shines through in his delivery. What's terrifying about Goeth is that he clearly believes that his victims aren't real people, that they're somehow lower than him in the food chain, and this permits him to treat them like insects or vermin. Fiennes gained 25 pounds for the role, all of which was mostly belly fat, as through his research he discovered that this was a man who ate and drank a lot. He would stuff himself with decadence to further block out any doubts and reward himself for his hard work, which is why the character constantly has a beverage or food in his hand throughout the movie. Whereas others are starving and struggling to survive, the least worthy man among them remains well fed, even seeming a little sloshed as he works sometimes. He displays little discipline, to the point he'll drink so much he can barely stand. This habitual consumption communicates a lot about the psychology of the character, as clearly all of this inhumanity and sadism never restricts his appetite. This contrast makes every scene feel even more off, as while the prisoners are worked to the bone and shot dead in front of him, he can still pleasantly enjoy his warm drink and feel pretty good about himself. This was a big part of Fiennes' preparation. He found that putting on the SS uniform made him feel powerful. He was actually embarrassed at how good he felt walking around in it. And that bleeds into the physicality of the character, how he proudly marches up and down the lines, enjoying the power he possesses. Even the little details, like the way he calls for the help to assist, this entitled finger point that no one else on screen ever does, speaks to how mighty he feels in the presence of his servants. The actor looked at examples like the Stanford Prison Experiment to develop his understanding that some people have a predisposition to abusing their power.
I think there's a latent thing in some people, when they're given positions of power, something inside them pushes them into overdrive and they abuse their power.
Director Steven Spielberg had just come from shooting Jurassic Park, a movie that was storyboarded to the nth degree, so he wanted to film Schindler's List a lot more on the fly, and for a historical drama, surprisingly trusted and encouraged his actors to take risks. Fiennes revealed that the director didn't get involved in motivation or in my interpretation of Amon Goeth. And from reading Steven's Alien script, it's clear that Spielberg gave the actor plenty of room to improvise and expand beyond what was on the page. Which leads us into the second key, playful inhumanity. If I asked you to think of a typical Nazi officer, you might imagine someone cold and machine-like in their war crimes. But Ralph brings something new to the table in his interpretation, a boyish playfulness. By portraying Amon with these childlike qualities, Ralph brings an undeserved humanity to his character. As if it wasn't for the psychopathic activities he engages in so brazenly, you could describe him as quite personable. It's the little improvised details that add so much to how the character feels on screen. For instance, when we first meet him, he has a cold. So like a sulking boy in the backseat of the car, and the next scene, Amon has this tissue pressed against his nose. This is a genius addition for two reasons. One, it instantly makes his character seem more vulnerable, and two, optically it looks as if he's covering his nose to block the smell of the prisoners, like he finds them physically repulsive. But when he selects Helen as his maid, just notice the little nuance of how Ralph makes his character seem almost good-natured.
I don't want to give him my call.
It's a small thing, but in this hellish environment, warmly remembering he has a cold and doesn't want to infect her after asking her to step forward is a human touch you could easily mistake for empathy. But as the film progresses, it becomes clear that Amon is such a nightmare because he's more like a spoiled child who's never been told no. He needlessly toys with his prey, knowing they can never retaliate. And all of this, the whole thing, feels like a game to him. To the point when he's hunting down Jews with his pals, it feels more like they're playing a fun game of tag and you just got caught, rather than the cruel reality. In the infamous sniper scene, Ralph finds subtle ways to communicate that this is all part of his character's daily routine, like using the rifle to do his morning stretches after casually eliminating some deadweight. Even though he's literally shooting fish in a barrel, Amon immaturely carries himself like he's John Wayne. The actor related this scene to a more primitive instinct, stating it was like an extension of that boyish thrill with an air rifle when you aim at cans on a wall. That satisfaction when you hit a target, it gives you a kick. It's as basic as smashing a fly with your hand as a kid and standing in front of a window pane for ages, seeing how many flies you can kill. Fiennes brings an almost comedic helplessness to the character, as although he has all this power and authority, he never strikes you as someone particularly capable, as he's weighted on hand and foot. When his gun won't fire during an execution and he and the other officers have to tinker over it, it feels like a dark comedy sketch. As to a narcissist like Goeth, this is the worst, most embarrassing inconvenience, with no consideration for what the experience must be like for his awaiting victim, who believes he's counting down the final seconds of his existence. Ralph plays the scene like he's the one really suffering here, as this consistent failure has hurt his itty-bitty ego and made him feel small, which we see in his rapid, frustrated blinks and nauseated lurches forward, as if he's physically willing the bullet out of the chamber. This personality quirk is consistent throughout the movie, that while all of his prisoners are undergoing unimaginable pain and suffering, he almost thinks of himself as the biggest victim of all, constantly complaining about all the work he's expected to do.
I wish this fucking light were open.
And this leads us into the final key, conflicted feelings. Part of what makes Amon so dangerous is that he almost never appears to have any conflicted feelings. If he did ever suffer from any moral quandaries, we would see him physically distance himself from his victims, creating an emotional barrier where his doubts could reside. Whereas instead the character's absolute commitment to the cause allows him to always speak so close and intimately to his prisoners, as if he has no reason to feel shame. Although it's nowhere to be found in the script, notice how Fiennes always circles his prey like a shark, preparing to attack. This creates discomfort for both the victim and the viewer, as he may be about to turn on them at any time from any angle. The only times he does appear to express conflicted feelings are when he watches Oscar water down the trains, at which point Ralph switches from cackling with the officers, like the naughty boys messing at the back of the class, to then realizing they've been duped, and Schindler is actually looking out for the Jewish prisoner's well-being. And to express his character's inability to believe his eyes, Fiennes blinks repeatedly while tilting his head to one side, to show he's now seeing Oscar in a new light. But the main source of his inner conflict is his maid Helen Hirsch. From the moment he laid eyes on her trembling hands, Amon appeared to have a soft spot for Helen. And through watching her work, he develops not just an affinity, but an attraction for her. So like a young boy with a schoolyard crush, he finds himself drawn to her cellar, where he compliments her cooking. But Fiennes highlights his character's inner conflict right away by having him restlessly pace back and forth, with his eyelids flickering to show his distressed emotional processing. So without needing to hear him say, "What the hell am I doing? This is wrong," we can still feel it. He asks her if she ever gets lonely, and gives her permission to answer honestly. But realizing that she's too scared to say the wrong thing, Goeth playfully monologues both sides of the conversation while circling her. Touching on the idea that they're both lonely, let's see how Fiennes physically plays out his character's conflicted feelings.
I would like so much to...
He starts off with this "let's go" exhale, then quickly stops himself, almost turns back, changes his mind, and goes right up to her, and then pulls himself away again. The most interesting acting aspect of this scene is his left hand, as if you watch closely, you can see that Ralph is using it as a symbol for his character's conflicted feelings, the tug-of-war inside himself. After admitting he wants to reach out and touch her, we then see his childlike insecurity squirming through his hands once again as he wonders out loud what it would be like.
What would that be like, I wonder? I mean, what would be wrong with that?
You could literally mute this scene and still know what's going on because Ralph has found a way to externalize his character's inner turmoil. He rubs his palms, wondering optimistically what it would be like. He then works through the problem, fretting about it with his hands up at his head, and then self-soothes by rubbing his wrist, wondering what would be so wrong with that. He cycles through each feeling fast, one after the other, and what's so bizarre is that he's playing it as if he's a kid hoping his crush will say she likes him too. But the whole scene is upside down, as she's his slave. There's nothing in his way except for himself and what he believes about her people. So she doesn't speak because she basically doesn't have a say on what happens next. He then uses his hand again to point to them both, claiming maybe it's not us, it's this, followed by more frantic blinking to show his uncomfortable internal processing. This is the first time we've ever heard or seen Amon express doubts about his ideology. And just as he walks right up to the line of betraying his values, they then slingshot back to baseline. He resists temptation. And then even though she said nothing and only ever done whatever he's asked her to, he takes it out on her. Like always, he makes his negative feelings other people's problem. Someone else must suffer, so he doesn't need to turn the microscope onto himself. Amon Goeth was a despicably wicked, immoral, and cruel man. But thanks to Ralph Fiennes' stellar performance in Schindler's List, he's not unrelatable. As somewhere buried deep beneath the blind spots of his beliefs, he is human. In any other context, you might even say he's not unlike people you've met in your daily life. But what's so disturbing about this depiction, and the Holocaust itself, is that it proved what horrors everyday people are capable of when guided by the wrong beliefs and granted unquestionable power over their fellow man. As Ralph Fiennes insightfully stated, evil may well be nearer the surface than we like to admit. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching, but if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing.